Can you tell us about yourself, Guy?
Let's see. I'm 23 years old, a graduate of Ferrum College, the author of the In Progress comic book, Depression Kills the Monster Within, and I am also the host of the Some Guy's Opinion podcast.
Awesome. Um, so when you say that you're the Depression Kills thing, the comic book. Well, actually, no. I forgot something. Holy cow! I forgot something yet again. Every show, I ask the icebreaker question, which is why people get scared and stuff. The icebreaker this week is: if you could only eat one sandwich for the rest of your life, what sandwich would that be?
Chicken bacon ranch.
Why?
Easy. I mean, what more do you want out of a sandwich? I have the protein with the chicken, the cheese, ranch, bacon. It's literally, it's like, I get that on everything. Like subs, pizza, so it's just like, if I could only have one sandwich for the rest of my life, it had to be chicken bacon ranch.
That makes sense. You know, I'm not much for the ranch, but the chicken and the bacon I get. That sounds fantastic. So, let's talk about the comic book process of writing a comic book. How do you get into that? Where does it start?
So I think for me, it started with just an idea. Obviously, like, I'm always been a fan of superheroes, comic books, things like that, movies, superheroes, all that stuff, anime as well. So for me, it just started with the idea. I was going for a jog one day. I was listening to the theme song Tokyo Ghoul, and at first it started off as an idea, as like a music video.
Okay.
And so that music video was centered around like depression, and it was gonna be like, oh, what if I, represent depression with like this sort of shadowy figure, and it just followed the guy around, and it was like sort of like that would be like the representation of depression. Then thought about it some more, developed it further, and I thought, okay, well, what if instead of just depression, it was like different emotions, different emotional states have powers, and they had abilities, and that ended up becoming the idea for Depression Kills the Monster Within, centered around the character Edward White. And he's dealing with the death of his friend Leo. He actually loses his friend Leo to a depression demon.
That sounds in depth. So, before we actually started the podcast or the show, you had talked about your illustrator. Who's your illustrator for the comic?
Vonix Art. You can find her on Instagram at Vonix Art. Christina is actually her first name.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually met doing the podcast. Like, I had her on. She was really cool. We hit it off. And then I ordered some commissions from her. I liked what she did. She actually did. Me and my girlfriend just had our 5th anniversary, so she did a drawing for that, which was like really cool. My girlfriend loved it, and so I was like, "Hey, I've got this story idea. Just read it over. Tell me what you think." And she read it. She's like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing! Like, it needs to be a comic book." And at that point, it wasn't really something I had considered. I kind of was just like, "Okay, it's a story. I'm writing it." She's like, "No, it can be a comic book." So then I proposed, like, "Well, do you want to draw it for me? We could work together. We can like work together. Just it could be our shared project." And she was like, "Yeah, sure."
So how do you feel about that when something that you didn't even really consider happens and it becomes something greater than what it was in your life? How do you feel about that collaboration and what it's brought?
Honestly, it's like, it just, everything seems to happen just so fast in terms of that process. Like, as far as just, you meet the person, you meet the right person, they vibe with you, you vibe with them, and then on top of it, to get to the point where you're just like, you really realize in a dream, because so many people talk about writing a book or writing a comic book. It's something we've always wanted to do, but to actually be doing it is kind of just, it's amazing. And like, so, thanks to her again. Please check out her work on Instagram at Bonix, because she's an amazing artist, and I was just really happy and blessed to be able to meet her and to be able to form that friendship and that collaboration. because I'm not the best drawer in the world. I'm like probably a step above stick figures, but no more than that. So I was super happy to find someone who's willing to like work with me and like take a chance on the project.
So, with your podcast, what's Some Guy's Opinion about?
So Some Guy's Opinion is pretty.
You're good. Just keep talking. I'm just going off camera for a second.
Okay.
So what's Some Guy's Opinion about?
Some Guy's Opinion is anything and everything involving some guy's opinion. Essentially, it is literally about like all the different things that I find interesting. I bring in different guests. It's very guest focused, guest centered. So I'll have on like doctors, comic book writers, battle rappers, musicians from like all over the world, Ireland, New Zealand, just all different places and all different people from all walks of life. And then I'll just ask them different questions, give my opinion as well. I invite the audience to share theirs as well. I like to really pride on this diversity and just making sure that there's something for everybody, no matter like where you're coming from. You'll be able to find one episode at the very least that you can identify with and learn something from and gain some knowledge from.
So, in the world we live in today, let's face it, we're all divided. Right? We're taught to be divided by the media, by the government, all that stuff. Realistically, there's no difference between me and you other than the color of our skin. Do you think that's important to bring into a podcast? Because you were talking about diversity and stuff.
Yeah, I did touch on race in a recent episode where we were talking about Black issues in America. I think there is an importance to bring on all different types of people because you see that people aren't that different, that we do all have some common ground to stand on. And let's face it, like we are different. Like, it is what it is. Like, I mean, but the thing is, the differences are what make the world great. If we were all the same, we would hate it. I think, like, Dr. Seuss wrote a book about it. I forget the name of it, but he had one school where they all dressed the same in the same style, all the same colors, black and gray. I'm like, you imagine if the world was like that, if we didn't have differences, different types of music? Like, it's almost like, imagine if in sports there was only one team and we all had to root for it. People would lose their minds.
Some people are like that, right?
Yeah.
So going forward, where do you see the comic book? Where do you see it being published first? When's it coming out, or is it coming out yet? If you know. And yeah,
not coming out anytime soon. We're in like the very early stage process of working on it. So when it comes out, it definitely will be coming out, I think, in a traditional book publishing like paper format. At least not right now. What we're probably gonna do is put it on Tapir or Webtoon, just like an online site, and just publishing it probably like weekly or so. And just like a chapter a week or something along those lines, and people can just sort of like see it. It'd be free to them, but there'd probably be like ad revenue that we could get from it in that capacity. But those are the things we're like ironing out right now.
That makes sense. Apparently, Devin says that you have an echo, and I think I'm trying to fix it right now. So when your podcast, what day of the week do you record that on?
So I record my podcast, usually just focus with the guests. I release it every Tuesday and Friday. So they're recorded beforehand, and then I'll release them every Tuesday and Friday at like 5 a.m. in the morning. So it's there in the morning throughout the whole day.
Okay. And your podcast. So you talk about tackling a diverse set of different things. Can you talk about some of the episodes you actually have already had in the past? Just some of the things you have talked about, specific issues?
Okay. I mean, we bring them up with different guests or whatever. Sometimes, most of the time with the guests, we're like focused on what they do, their professions, and everything, and it kind of just flows from there. I think as far as just the diversity of the podcast comes from the different guests I have on. So like I was talking to a doctor, he's an ER doctor, he's African American. He comes from a very like poverty-stricken background. So I was asking him, what is it like being in this field as a doctor? And he talked about just some of the challenges that he faced, that him and other ER doctors will face when they're disagreeing with other doctors in the field, just as far as fighting for their their patients' medical rights, where it's just like, we might need the cardiologist, the example he gave, we might need the cardiologist to approve something. And we sometimes have to fight with the cardiologist to make sure we can get our patient the care that we think they needed, because it's opinion versus opinion, and we're like arguing on the phone. He went about that. I asked him, what's it like being a black doctor in the field? And he said, for the most part, it's always been very good. But there is that, the sort of like that small percentage of times where I've had a woman come up to me and say, I don't want him treating my child because he's black. And it is what it is. And, he says like, and he says, and that's tough. And he says like, I can talk to my other colleagues about it. Some of them, they can empathize, but they still don't necessarily know what that feeling is like. It's like, it's much of the empathize and they're trying. He says, I appreciate it, but I still have to, like, when I talk to other African American doctors, they can understand it on a deeper level because they themselves have also experienced it. And so that's sort of like, I had on a Jewish singer, which was very interesting. And she talked about just the differences in terms of how her religion plays a role in her music. She was talking about how other Orthodox male singers, they don't really have as much leeway to sing different types of music. She's like, with female, Orthodox Jewish singers, they can sing like more pop and newer styles, whereas the male singers have to be very much more so traditional, just because it's dictated by what that religion allows. So things like that are things I wouldn't know about until I talk to different people who I don't usually talk to.
That makes sense. That's one of the things I found from this show as well. I've talked to more African American people on my show probably in the last week than I had ever seen in my life. I live in the middle of Canada, where we're a very white-centric culture and a very First Nation-centric culture. There's not very many black people out here. So it's been good to get different, diverse opinions on. So before we end off the interview, what I'm going to ask you is, you have something to promote, so talk about your podcast, talk about your comic book and stuff like that. If you have any links or anything that you want to share, or if you want to just share your Facebook page, go ahead. This is your chance to promo yourself.
So I'm Ganja. You can find me at Some Guy's Opinion on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you want to find Depression Kills the Monster Within, if you go to my Facebook page, Some Guy's Opinion TM, there's links to it there. Links to my stuff on my Instagram as well. If you want to just go straight to the book itself, the first 3 chapters are free on Wattpad, WATTPAD. Once again, it's Wattpad, WATTPAD. You can also find my other ongoing story, Mage Hunters, which is just a fantasy story. A lot of Dungeons and Dragons themes in there, if that's something you're into. Also, check out Vonnick's art. She's super dope. She's on Instagram. She does commissions on Fiverr. So if you want a drawing, definitely hit her up as well.
So with Mage Hunter, that's what it's called, correct? I didn't mess that up.
Mage Hunters.
What type of book is that? I'm a Forgotten Realms guy, if you know what that is. It's like the R.A. Salvatore, Ed Greenwood books. What's Mage Hunters about?
So Mage Hunters is set in the fantasy world, and in a world where people can shoot fireballs and fly and create lightning from their hands with magic, I always found it cool, or find kind of interesting how some people would still choose to fight with swords. So I took that concept of basically a group of people called Mage Hunters who use no magic, and they fight and they go and hunt down magical creatures and magical beings who've gone rogue using only martial weapons. 3 characters have been introduced so far in the book. Daryl Clearwater, who's a gunslinger by trade, so that's what he does. Arian Longshadow, who's a rogue, and the last one being Drexler, who's a dragonborn monk. So at this point, they've been called up to sort of deal with this big crisis, and you'll have to tune into the next chapter to find out what that crisis is.
What's funny about that is lots of people are listening. What the hell is a dragonborn? This one might only be for me, everybody, but oh well. I love those books because it lets you take yourself out of this world that we're in right now, and it implants you, right? It puts you there. It's fun. So before we end, I always ask one last question because we're all locked up these days, right? I'm not sure if you guys are allowed to go out, but what's one thing you've done today, other than this interview, that you've done just for yourself, not for anybody else, just for yourself to make yourself happy?
Oh, 100%. I'm binge watching an anime that I found recently that I didn't get to finish when I was a kid called Mare. I've definitely been binge watching that and enjoying every second of it.
That's fantastic. So, everybody, we end the show in one simple way. Once again, go find Some Guy's Opinion. This is Guy, by the way, right, Guy?
Yep.
And there's links somewhere, I'm sure, either up there or down there. They're somewhere. Find the part of the interview where he promoted himself, and we end it this way. Say bye, Guy.
Bye, Guy.